Right now, Russia's empire is collapsing before our eyes. Azerbaijan is ready to arm Ukraine, Armenia is reopening its border with Turkey after 33 years, and even Tajikistan, once loyal to Moscow, is turning away. Meanwhile, China remains Putin's last lifeline, but for how long? Binjan's support is cracking and the Kremlin is running out of friends, money and time. Welcome to Ukraine Today, I'm Zoroslava Kolesnikova, and in this episode we uncover how the post-Soviet world is slipping through Putin's fingers and the walls are closing in the Russia's downfall has already begun. Azerbaijan ready to arm Ukraine, embargo may be lifted. Baku is reportedly preparing to send Soviet-era weapons and launch mass production of artillery shells for Ukraine. This marks a dramatic shift. Azerbaijan, long keeping distance from the war, is now stepping closer to Kiev's side. Will this new alliance change the battlefield? And how will Moscow react? Full details in our report.
Azerbaijan may lift its embargo on supplying weapons to Ukraine and send its Soviet-era equipment to the front. Meanwhile, media reports have emerged that Azerbaijan is launching serial production of artillery ammunition for Ukraine.
Azerbaijan has accumulated quite a lot of weaponry, both from the Soviet era and from more recent purchases made as the country prepared for the deoccupation of its territory. To say that they have a huge amount of weaponry, especially considering the scale of our front and the nature of the war, would not be accurate. But for Azerbaijan, these numbers are quite substantial and impressive.
After the Russians shot down an Azerbaijani plane over Grozny and refused to admit responsibility for what they had done, Azerbaijan took up arms. President Aliyev publicly sided with Ukraine and called Russia an occupier.
And I think this resonates with the aspirations of the Ukrainian people to never accept occupation. That is the main piece of advice. That's what we did.
I think that in Azerbaijan itself, people remember very well who brought war to their land. Formally, yes, it was Armenia, the occupation of Nagorno-Karabakh, but it was the Russian Federation that provided us with complete military, political and financial support. And moreover, who controlled the occupied Nagorno-Karabakh through so-called peacekeepers? Well, the Russians.
At the SCO forum in Beijing, Aliyev shook Putin's hand very coldly and demonstratively refused to speak with him.
That was an unprecedented act against our people. We are not responsible for the deterioration of relations. We respond constructively and lawfully, but we will never tolerate any signs or manifestations of aggression or disrespect towards us.
Russia didn't lag behind either and began to brutally crack down on members of the Azerbaijani diaspora. The security forces even killed 2 people.
Some of the victims had their ribs broken. There are those who suffered spinal and internal organ injuries. If Azerbaijan had not intervened, the number of victims could have been hundreds of times higher.
In Baku, several journalists from a pro-Russian publication were arrested, directly accused of having ties to the FSB and Russian intelligence. They were said to have been conducting agent-based intelligence activities on Azerbaijani territory in the interests of the Russian Federation. So, in other words, this was a kind of asymmetric response.
But the real low blow was Azerbaijan and Armenia signing a peace agreement in the United States. They completely ignored Russia as a permanent partner and mediator. Russia's influence in the Caucasus is fading away.
Armenia and Azerbaijan commit to permanently cease hostilities, open up trade, establish transport links, diplomatic relations, and also to respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
The Russian Federation feels its own position is weak. It senses that it basically has no way to influence Aliyev or Azerbaijan. And we see that it has started shelling gas infrastructure used by Azerbaijan already on the territory of Ukraine in the Odessa region.
Now Russia has begun to shell Azerbaijani oil depots and gas distribution stations in Ukraine. So far, Azerbaijan has provided Ukraine exclusively with humanitarian aid, but things could change very quickly.
At the moment, we have provided humanitarian and financial aid totaling 40 million euros, and this assistance is ongoing. It is completely transparent and purely humanitarian in nature. We have implemented several social infrastructure projects in the city of Irpin and will continue to do so. You know that Ukrainian children regularly visit us as guests. We will do everything in our power to help.
According to insider information, there could be several hundred units there, not grads, but smirch systems, I think around 80 or so. In fact, such a reinforcement with equipment in a specific section of the front can significantly strengthen our positions. Plus, there are, let's say, hundreds of pieces of military equipment as well. These are still Soviet-era models, the same APCs, the same IFVs, which would also be absolutely useful for Ukraine.
Given the ongoing attempts by the Russians to harm Azerbaijan, Azerbaijani weapons may soon appear on the Ukrainian front lines.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Armenia breaks 33 years of isolation border with Turkey to reopen. In a historic move, Armenia is ready to restore diplomatic ties and reopen its 328-kilometer border with Turkey, close signed the early 1990s. Officials in Yerevan say there are no obstacles left. On their side, the process could begin as soon as tomorrow. Will this mark a new era of peace or spark new tensions in the region? Full story in report.
A major event for Armenia. After nearly 33 years of isolation, the country is ready to restore relations with its neighbor and reopen their shared border.
There are no delays or issues on the Armenian side. We are ready to open the borders and establish diplomatic relations as soon as tomorrow.
The Armenian-Turkish border stretches for a total of 328 kilometers, from the triple border junction with Georgia in the north to the junction with Azerbaijan in the south. It has been closed since April 3, 1993, when Turkey unilaterally blocked the border, officially citing the occupation of Azerbaijani regions by Armenian forces as the reason. Back then, 3 decades ago, the Ankara government promised to open the border only on the condition that Armenia would stop seeking international recognition of the Armenian genocide by the Turks and withdraw its troops from the conflict zone in Nagorno-Karabakh. And now, in 2025, it seems that the disagreements between the neighboring countries have been resolved.
Experts believe that in this way, Pashinyan is trying to shift the focus from territorial claims to attempts at building peaceful relations with neighboring countries.
Armenia has only very recently taken a sharp new course toward reconciliation with its neighbors. It was just this August that an official peace agreement signing ceremony with Azerbaijan took place at the White House. The document stipulates that Baku and Yerevan renounce mutual territorial claims and also cease the use of force against each other. And now, just a month later, Armenia is ready to let go of old grievances and start a new chapter in its history with neighboring Turkey by opening the land borders between the two countries.
This is, kind of an important epilogue to the significant August 8th meeting in Washington. And when people in Armenia, Azerbaijan, and indeed many other surrounding countries across the region started saying and truly believing that a lasting peace had finally truly come to the area. And perhaps this could be interpreted as a significant and encouraging gesture for Armenia, specifically coming from Turkey, offering a potential path forward.
However, experts clarify that the intention to open the borders should not be confused with the actual launch of local border checkpoints. Despite Armenia's clear desire to be friends with its neighbors again, the decision to reopen the border will not be made by Turkey alone.
I think that Turkey will not make this decision without coordinating with Azerbaijan.
Experts note there is no breakthrough yet, the borders remain closed, trade is only conducted through third countries, and even diplomatic relations have not been established. And the main reason is still the unresolved issues with Azerbaijan.
Turkey's position in the Caucasus is stronger than ever, and opening the borders with Armenia would only increase the local population's loyalty to Ankara, analysts assert. Nevertheless, some experts believe that the borders between Turkey and Armenia will not open this year, nor in the foreseeable future. After all, discussions about this have been going on since as far back as 2020. On February 11, 2023, it seemed that the end of the blockade was already near. At that time, the border was temporarily opened for the first time in 30 years to allow the delivery of humanitarian aid from Armenia to those affected by the severe earthquake in Turkey and Syria. Afterwards, Erdogan thanked them for their support and once again locked up his checkpoints. After all, Ankara can increase its presence in the Caucasus even without opening its borders.
This means an increase in Turkish influence in Armenia, which in turn means an increase in Turkish influence in the South Caucasus. But they say, sorry, but Mr. Erdogan has made a personal political promise to Mr. Aliyev. So, even though we understand that normalizing Armenian-Turkish relations is beneficial for Turkey, Azerbaijan is still more important than Armenia.
The only thing all experts agree on is that no matter how events unfold in Turkish-Armenian relations, they will be much better than the relationships the Caucasus countries currently have with Russia. In just a few years, Russia has lost all its former influence over the region, ceding this position to Turkey.
Russia will be completely pushed out of the region if this is true. And it seems that it doesn't have a single bit of anything or, well, any means to influence this. In other words, the time has already been lost. Everything Russia could have done needed to be done back in 2020.
China keeps Putin afloat. Beijing helps Russia wage war in Ukraine. China remains Moscow's lifeline, fueling its economy and keeping Putin's war machine running. Beijing proudly calls the partnership a strategic friendship, while Russia officials hail it as a key to survival under sanctions. But how long will China keep baking a losing war? And could this alliance soon backfire on both regimes? Full breakdown in our report.
China is Russia's main partner, helping it keep its economy afloat and wage war in Ukraine.
They shouted that, well done. Clerky, yes, well done. Hooray! On the Chinese one.
I'm spreading out.
From the very Patelzhan.
Children's contacts with President Vladimir Putin in various forms on the platform of the dynamic and long-term development of Chinese-Russian relations. Thank you very much.
But is that really the case? After all, at the same time, China denies selling weapons or components to Russia, and Chinese banks have stopped transactions with Russia because of sanctions. These are
pairs, threes, tens of millions of Chinese soldiers. That would be just what we need right now. But
why do you think so?
Why not?
Why? Do you really think only soldiers should die?
Just look at the Belgorod region. I think how much we lack the Chinese people's army.
Very often we hear statements from China that China has never sold weapons to Russia and that China supports the territorial integrity of Ukraine and wants an end to the Russian-Ukrainian war.
Just 3 years ago, propagandists were rejoicing, saying, let Western companies leave, we'll buy everything from China.
Now we've bought a wonderful, completely Chinese car. It's amazing. Many, many times cheaper than the cars we used to buy before. I bought myself 3 pairs of Gucci shoes. 2,000 rubles each. Wonderful. Probably made somewhere in China as well. I hope here too. Fake, of course. As a matter of principle, I only buy fakes now.
There's not even any need to comment on how that turned out. And that so-called Chinese support for the Russian economy resulted in the bankruptcy of Russian manufacturers.
And just look at what, for example, the soldiers are using. What, are they using Russian-made vehicles? You have to be a real patriot to drive a Patriot, because it costs a fortune. It breaks down all the time, and the spare parts are insanely expensive. That's why the guys drive Chinese vehicles. And now they need motorcycles. Russian ones aren't available. For some reason, that's how it turns out, right? There are very few Russian ones. Actually, there are none at all. So what are we even talking about? No, there are no Russian patriots at all. What, you didn't know that?
If you look at the Russian Federation from an economic perspective, they're simply used as a basic sales market. Except for, let's say, the military industry, which is a significant sector. But as for civilian engineering, its presence has practically been reduced to absolutely zero.
And Russia has literally turned into a raw materials appendage for China. By the way, Foreign Minister Lavrov came up with a very apt metaphor calling Putin Xi Jinping's footstool.
As they say in the East, a guest follows the host's step. So all the programs, of course, depend on the gracious proposals that the Chinese president and his team have made to our president. And basically, from an economic standpoint, all China needs is cheap raw materials, which, by the way, Russia possesses in vast abundance. It's not just natural gas and crude oil, but also significant reserves of lithium, extensive timber resources, numerous valuable metals, and in fact, a substantial amount of gold as well. In other words, all the things that are then used in China itself to produce goods for the entire world.
Moreover, this situation manifests itself in completely different aspects. In China, new official geographic maps have been approved on which part of Russian territory, the Bolshoi-Ussuriski Island, is recognized as Chinese territory. In fact, the Chinese have already settled huge parts of Siberia and turned the territory into their own colonies.
The Chinese dragon is unlikely to stay within its own country, simply because, by the way, it actually has certain historical claims to a significant part of our Far East. And that's a fact.
Of course, at first there was enthusiasm, but gradually it faded, and eventually we all realized that Asina had become a Chinese colony. It's simply a slave-owning enterprise, a slave camp, or a prison, if you will, where they put overseers to keep the workers in line. Because the resentment is still there, no matter what. And the workers went out in Asina to protest with the slogan, Asina is not China. And they also regularly threaten, saying that you won't be able to get a job anywhere in this city. Here's your black mark. So sit quietly and keep your mouth shut for your 15 to 30,000.
They are very good at waiting. And this ability to wait, it's also about the integration of the Chinese into the territory of the Russian Federation. And this, in fact, is already essentially an annexation. Moreover, if you pay attention, on some Chinese maps, certain regions of the Russian Federation are already labeled with Chinese names. Well, listen, why would you even need to declare war for that?
Russian television is already showing segments about how to find a Chinese husband. And in Russian schools and government institutions, Chinese language is being actively studied.
People are divided into two camps, those who want to learn and those who are skeptical about it, saying, why do we need Chinese? We're not planning to go anywhere. I'll give you a very simple answer, actually. I say, I'm not teaching you Chinese here. I'm using the Chinese language to make you think for yourselves. And that skill will always come in handy.
Putin constantly tries to characterize relations with China as a strong friendship, but Xi Jinping literally spat in his face. Xi took away from Russia that very great victory.
And just yesterday, my friend and representative of the PRC treated me to this kind of Peking duck. I'll be honest with you, there were two pieces, and I thought I'd only eat one. You get what I mean, right? But I couldn't resist. I ate the second one too, you know, it was just so delicious.
China and Russia, being the main theaters of military action in World War II, made a decisive contribution to the victory over fascism and thus laid the cornerstone of the post-war world order.
China and Russia are neither friends nor partners. And here's what's important. As soon as China has enough motivation to limit its cooperation with the Russian Federation, believe me, it will do so. Russia, in fact, has no other choice. Either befriend China now or face economic and consequently political, military, and all other kinds of collapse at the same time.
It turns out that China is not helping Russia save its economy or win the war at all, but is simply taking advantage of its weakness to take its resources and strengthen its own influence in Asia.
Putin's last hope trip, Tajikistan turns its back on Russia. Global media call it what it is, a desperate visit. With former allies slipping away, Putin is trying to cling to what's left on Moscow's influence in Central Asia. But the truth is clear. Russia has no leverage left. Its partners are moving on and the Kremlin's empire is crumbling. Can Putin still save face, or is this the final act of Russia's fleeting power? Full story in our report.
A visit of last hope. That's exactly how global media have dubbed Putin's trip to Tajikistan. After all, former allies, or more accurately, former vassals, are simply turning their backs on Russia.
In fact, Russia doesn't really have any significant tools to put serious pressure on its Central Asian partners, who are supposedly its allies in the CSTO, the Customs Union, the SCO, and elsewhere. But there doesn't seem to be much willingness to cooperate on their part.
In fact, Bloomberg analysts report that the Kremlin's longtime allies in Central Asia and the Caucasus are building ties with China, the European Union, Turkey, and the Persian Gulf countries, seeking to protect themselves from further aggression by Moscow. The reason for all this is the attack on Ukraine, because Putin has essentially declared that he is ready to use force to reclaim any territory that was once under Soviet influence. But such conclusions by Western media are far from unfounded. Among the former allies, Azerbaijan is now clearly leading the way in terms of its behavior toward Moscow. Refusing to attend Putin's parade, seeking other security guarantors, and most importantly, searching for new international trade markets. All of this reflects Baku's current position. Even Putin's admissions on the eve didn't help. He admitted, for example, that it was indeed his air defense that shot down an Azerbaijani plane over Chechnya at the end of last year. It seems that even such statements can no longer save the relationship.
For the most part, for the first time in the history of the post-Soviet space, we are seeing a country that is quite close to Moscow, a country that is fairly loyal and has a similar political regime, one that did not take a different path like Ukraine or Georgia under Saakashvili, acting in a way that is not typical or as was previously customary. It publicly and openly criticizes Russia, and not only criticizes, but also actively backs up its criticism with reciprocal and proportionate actions, similar to how Russia itself acts towards citizens of other sovereign countries.
And the desire to live independently is being voiced more and more openly from a country in Central Asia. For example, just a few days ago, speaking at the UN, the leader of Kyrgyzstan stated that the country will now build its international relations without looking back at Moscow. I can
confidently say that today the process of forming a new Central Asia has begun thanks to its unity, stability, and growing regional identity. It is taking an increasingly strong position in the system of international relations as an independent entity.
The United States is also adding fuel to the fire in Russian-Asian relations. For instance, Donald Trump announced his readiness to pull yet another territory, Uzbekistan, out of Russia's sphere of influence. The head of the White House announced agreements reached between major American business representatives and the authorities of Uzbekistan. Companies will invest $1 billion in geological exploration and the development of critical mineral deposits in Uzbekistan. Trump also announced a major deal between Uzbekistan Airways and the American corporation Boeing. The agreement, which involves the delivery of 22 aircraft, is valued at $8 billion.
There are many areas in which Uzbekistan and the United States of America can expand mutually beneficial cooperation. I assure you, I personally guarantee the success of American companies operating in Uzbekistan. We will create all the necessary conditions so that American businesses feel confident and can fully take advantage of the opportunities in our market.
A sensational piece of news was published yesterday by Reuters journalists. Turkey will be able to meet its own gas needs and is therefore reducing imports from Russia and Iran. As a result, Russia is losing its largest client, one of the last in Europe. At the same time, Ankara plans to ensure its own supply by increasing production and boosting imports from the United States.
Of course, as always, Turkey will use its Eastern diplomacy to play both sides, either appealing to emotions or seeking benefits, bit by bit.
Eating the elephant piece by piece, just like China. For example, China has stopped supplying Russia with high-precision equipment, which Russian manufacturers are now openly stating. In particular, the owner of the company Tatpromstan, Ildar Nureyev. The head of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, Oleksiy Kovalenko, said that active negotiations are currently underway between Beijing and Washington on strategic rapprochement, which could ultimately have catastrophic consequences for Russia.
China, a major global power, is in no immediate hurry to supply those very same crucial dual-use products and essential technologies to Russia, a nation that very much desires and desperately needs these items for its ongoing efforts and economic stability. These are essential semiconductors, critical components, specialized machine building equipment, and large sophisticated machines specifically used for the construction of self-propelled artillery. These are specialized industrial machines primarily used for the comprehensive production of ammunition, essential components for gunpowder and various explosives, and a range of other manufactured goods, including robust protective plates for body armor designed for military personnel. So,
China, acting in its own interests, is already putting obstacles in Putin's way when it comes to Russia's attempts to form gas alliances with Central Asia. Since the beginning of this year, Gazprom's attempts to build domestic gas networks in these countries have been failing in a rather surprising way. And analysts explain this is not without Beijing's involvement.
China has shown its lack of interest, made it clear, and somehow all these projects suddenly started to stall, and they are now facing certain contradictions, both economic and some technological and logistical reasons as well. Sometimes the roads aren't being built properly, and sometimes the standards aren't being met, or something else goes wrong. Then the political will in the Central Asian countries has shifted a bit. They've started saying that they can supply oil and gas to China on their own without intermediaries or help from Russia. And they don't need Russian volumes to secure their own shares in the Chinese gas market.
At the same time, to the average person, it might seem like there's no break in relations at all. The leaders of Central Asian countries regularly meet with Putin, and if you listen to Russian propaganda, it sounds like cooperation is only growing stronger. According to analysts, the main reason for this behavior remains the issue of migrants.
This is a very serious factor that forces Central Asia to take Russia into account and to be more conciliatory, even in the current situation. The fact is that millions of labor migrants work in Russia. This significantly eases social tensions in the region. Because if this generation, millions of people were to return, for example, Uzbekistan has 2 million, Kyrgyzstan 1 million, and so on, if they were to come back to their countries, those countries would not be able to provide them with decent jobs and wages. As a result, social discontent could arise in those countries.
However, as soon as new ties with the West strengthen and gain momentum, the migrants themselves will begin to return home. After all, the nature of deals with Western partners is not about kickbacks and percentages, but about legitimate enrichment at the state level, not just for individual officials. And the choice of whether to live in a sanctioned Russia or in their own country with prospects will no longer be an issue.
That's all for today on Ukraine Today. If you believe the truth must be louder than crumbling lies, like, comment and subscribe. Want to stand with us on the information front? Become a sponsor. Your support helps us expose propaganda, reveal war crimes and keep Ukrainians' voice strong across the world. Stay informed, stay strong and stay with Ukraine.